Thank you, Sahar. You're very kind. First, I am really, truly overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude and just feeling honored that I'm in the company of such great scholars and great minds. Um, every one of you is just stellar in your own right. It's just amazing, subhanAllah. So it's 15 minutes, so I'll try to be as direct as possible. So we all, I think, know that the text of the Quran itself is quite clear about the issue of coercion and religion. In fact, in terms of religious texts, I know no other religious text that takes at least the direct propositional position, لا إكراه في الدين قد تبين الرشد من الغي, or ولو شاء الله لآمن من في الأرض جميعا أفأنت تكره الناس على أن يكونوا مؤمنين, that there is no compulsion in religion, no coercion in religion, and even more explicitly, if Allah would have willed, everyone would have believed, and then asks sort of the rhetorical question, God speaking to the prophet saying, so do you think you have the right to coerce people into believing? Well, so the Quran itself is quite clear about this. I think that the morality of the Quran was quite ahead of its age, and not surprisingly, in my view, the medieval Muslim mind created fine distinctions between the laws of apostasy, the punishment of apostasy, which ironically, so many Muslim jurists say that an apostate can be punished for death, but this doesn't contradict no coercion in religion. Also, the penalties that classical Muslim jurists specified for the crime of insulting the Prophet. And when they mean insulting the Prophet, it doesn't mean criticizing the Prophet. It means actually using obscenities or slander. That doesn't surprise me in terms of the medieval mind. The idea of tolerating difference, or even the idea of freedom to believe, it took human beings a great deal of trauma and intellectual development to reach. So in many ways, the Quran was ahead of its time. Now, having said that, I think that even at the modern moment, people don't realize the extent to which Quran is surprising at many levels on the issue of freedom to believe. So, for instance, when the Quran comments on the position of what I call the opposition group in Ghazwat Hunayn, in one of the main battles, or the Quran in Surah Tawbah comments on Ghazwat Tabuk and the dissenters who either refused to join the battle. Now, the Muslims have gotten accustomed to interpreting the Quran, saying that the Quran is talking about hypocrites, and that the hypocrites, the problem was in their faith. However, what a lot of people miss is that the Quran talks not just about hypocrites, but about hypocrites and mushrikeen, both hypocrites and non-believers who opposed the Prophet's decision and took a very contrary position to certain events, certain policies that the Prophet adopted. So what I'm saying is that non-believers existed in Medina at the time of the Prophet, and that non-believers continued to exist in Medina and later on in Mecca at the time of the Prophet. And that in the same way that the Prophet of Islam never took any actions against the so-called hypocrites, he also never took any actions against those who refused to become Muslim, both in Medina and later on after the conquering of Mecca, in Mecca itself. And we have a very long record where history records those who insulted or other words humiliated or attempted to humiliate or slander the Prophet of Islam, and without consequence. But nevertheless, the medieval jurisprudential mind was far more influenced by the laws, by the wars of apostasy that were launched by the first Khalifa Abu Bakr than they were influenced by the actual text of the Quran or their understanding of the Sunnah of the Prophet. Now, having said that, and because I know it's a very tight time, if so why haven't Muslims reinterpreted Islamic law to take clear, methodical positions against the laws that punish apostasy or laws that punish blasphemy in one form or another? Well, I think the answer is in the deficit of democracy in Muslim countries. And let me just say the most clear and unambiguous statement I can think of. Today, we live in a reality where in a country like Egypt, 100 million, over 100 million Muslims, a country like Egypt, you can, if you are sufficiently pro-government, you can say very critical things about Islam. In fact, you can say very critical things about Muhammad himself. Muslim airwaves every day are full of people like Ibrahim Isa or Nawal al-Saadawi, or when he was alive, Sayyid al-Qimni. Social media is full of individuals that live in Egypt that proudly declare themselves malahida, non-believers, and say some, but at the same time, you can get away with that. There is no way on the face of this earth that you can get away with criticizing Sisi. So we live in a reality in which we are asking people to accept the incomprehensible and the entirely paradoxical to them. Take a critical in what, for instance, in Egypt, they call Taqdeed al-Khitab al-Dini, renewing Islam or renewing, where the dictator that rules the country, that single intellect that is at the top of the helm, who is entirely sacrosanct. You can't criticize that dictator directly or indirectly. The dictator is effectively more sacrosanct and sacred than the Prophet, than God, than the companions, than anyone. What you see in Egypt, you also see in Saudi, you also see in the Emirat, you also see in every despotic paradigm. And I think that especially because of the history of dictatorship in the post-colonial era, and also the history of evangelism in Muslim countries under the auspices of colonialism, it has left us frozen in moment where, regardless of what the Quran says, the laws of apostasy, the inheritance of a medieval age, remain an issue because people react to dictatorship and to the transgressions of despotism by clinging to whatever tradition that gives them a sense of identity and dignity they can cling to. And they cling to that tradition often in irrational ways and in ways that are very difficult to negotiate with. I don't know how much time I have left, Sahar, but if I can say, I remember watching, and this is perhaps Dr. Radwan Maswoudi can comment on this if he wishes. I remember watching when Morsi died, There was someone in the Tunisian parliament that just wanted to read the Fatiha on the soul of Morsi. And the hysterics that I saw some people go into, in Congress, you can say prayers where you acknowledge Jesus all the time. But in Muslim countries, we are so thoroughly colonized that even reading the Fatiha in a parliament becomes an international event. And ultimately, when I saw the reaction to just someone reading the Fatiha in the Tunisian parliament, I knew that it would be a matter of time before that democratic experiment is overthrown, as always happened and has consistently been the pattern. So I don't think it's a simplistic matter of just saying, well, the Quran doesn't approve of coercion and expecting everyone to understand what that means and the full implications of that is. I'll stop here, and inshallah, if there are questions, I hope I said enough to ignite an interesting conversation.